This is Title 18, Word Crimes. I'm Eric Arneson. On this episode, public radio reporter Scott Detrow reads Pretty Little Things, a short story by Chris Holm. I'm a big fan of Chris's Collector trilogy. That trilogy starts with the novel Dead Harvest, and it continues with The Wrong Goodbye and The Big Reap. The three books recast the battle between heaven and hell as an old-fashioned crime pulp, and they're great fun to read. Highly recommended. Chris's short stories have appeared in Ellery Queen's Mystery Magazine, Alfred Hitchcock's Mystery Magazine, and the Best American Mystery Stories 2011. He's been nominated for and won numerous awards. His upcoming thriller, The Killing Kind, is about a man who makes his living hitting hitmen, only to wind up a target himself. And now here's Pretty Little Things, written by Chris Holm, originally published in Ellery Queen's Mystery Magazine, and read by Scott Detrow.
The first call came in around midnight Friday. Stayed on the line long enough to register as missed, but not long enough to leave a message. Another at 1:30 a.m. Same number. Same result. At 3, it was a text. "Please call," was all it said. All caps, like it was an emergency. After that, the calls dried up. Robert Geist didn't see the calls till morning. In fact, if it weren't for Jillian hunting the house over for the source of that annoying buzzing, he wouldn't have noticed till Monday morning when he put his coat on to leave for work. He only used his cell on weekdays and only ever to talk to Jillian. When he was actually with her, there wasn't much point in checking messages. Truth be told, he didn't know why she even bought it for him. Anywhere he went, there was already a phone. But she'd insisted, and like any husband, he'd capitulated. Mostly it just sat in his valet or jacket pocket as it had this weekend, untouched and unremembered until she rang him up next. But Jillian's got ears like a bat, he thought with a smile, and the vibration from the missed call alert was driving her nuts. So their Saturday paper and morning cups of coffee, his black, hers cream no sugar, were abandoned in favor of a game of Find the Noise. Thusly were the messages discovered. Of course, if it had been an emergency, by mid-morning Saturday, the emergency was likely long past. And anyways, Robert wasn't sure what he could have done to help. The number was at 212, Manhattan, and neither of them recognized it. Jillian had a second cousin in New York, but she was pretty sure he lived in Brooklyn, and Robert hadn't had cause to call the city since his parts distributor moved overseas. Robert owned a small appliance repair shop on Front Street in Farmington, Maine. 8 hours and a world away from the urban jungle of the city. In fact, he was more than willing to chalk the whole thing up to a wrong number. But Jillian was another story. "Come on," she chided. "Aren't you a little curious? I mean, they called 3 times, and that text, so insistent, so mysterious. It's like we're in some kind of thriller. How could you not want to know what it's about?" Airport thrillers were more Jillian's bag than Robert's. He preferred nonfiction to any silly made-up story. And anyways, he always thought the absence of thrills in his life was more of a blessing than a curse. And the very thought of the two of them, he a middle-aged repairman, she a dowdy Sunday school teacher, embroiled in some kind of far-fetched wrong man story, was enough to make him shake his head and smile. But when the woman you're married to has a bug in her ear, you're hard-pressed to ignore it. "Fine," he said, raising his arms in acquiescence. "What would you have me do?" She looked at him like he had 3 heads. "Just what the text asked you to do. Call them back." So, Robert called them back. 3 rings, 4. Finally, someone answered. Female. Older by the sound of her. English definitely not her first language. Possibly not her 3rd through 4th either. "Okay, hello." No pause between the words. No hint it was a question. And in the background, a horrible racket, like she was answering from inside a rock tumbler. "Hi, my name is—" "Hello?" Robert flinched, held the phone away from his ear. Jillian, watching, smiled and raised an eyebrow. At least someone was enjoying this, he thought. Yes, hello," he said, damn near shouting now. "My name is Robert Geist." "No Bobbert here." "No, I'm Bobbert, Robert." "To whom am I speaking?" "Not whom, Miss Kim." "Okay, Miss Kim. Can you tell me where I'm calling?" "You don't know?" Robert fought the urge to snap. "No, I don't know. If you could just—" "Pretty Little Things." "Pretty Little Things?" That got another eyebrow raise from the missus. Pretty little things. Pick up, drop off, self-serve. No dry clean. Wait, you're a laundromat? Yes, laundromat. Now it was Miss Kim who sounded irritated. If you don't know, why you call? Finally, they were getting somewhere. I got some messages from this number late last night, but whoever called didn't leave a message. And then they sent a text asking me to call back. You leave clothes for pickup? No, I didn't. I'm in Maine. What time you say they call? Midnight was the first. We close midnight. We close 9. Boss in some nights late. Maybe he call. This boss have a name? Yes, boss have name, she replied as if old Bobbert was a bit of an idiot. Name Gary Stote. Robert thanked her for her time and disconnected. Jillian looked at him, expectant, for a moment, and then said, Well? Well, what? The number's for a laundromat in Manhattan, and they weren't even open when we got those calls. Obviously, it was just some kind of wrong number. Then what was that business at the end? You asked for a boss. Robert sighed. She said something about her boss worked late. I asked his name, figured maybe it'd ring a bell. It didn't. And what was it? She asked, perhaps a little too innocently. It was clear she didn't want her little thriller to end. Gary something. Honestly, I don't remember. Now, can we please just chalk this up to a wrong number so I can get back to my crossword? Jillian frowned. Fine, she said. Thank you, Robert replied. He settled back into his armchair and retrieved his coffee from the side table. It was bitter, gritty, cold. Was it Gary Stout? Robert forked a bite of pork chop into his mouth, raised his eyes to meet his wife's. The boss, the man whose name you couldn't remember, was it Gary Stout? Don't know, he said, sighing. He hoped they'd put this to bed this morning, but apparently, no luck. Could be. Why? I did some digging, she said, as though she were a reporter on the beat and not a frumpy housewife. And it turns out Gary Stout is a major player in the Rossetti crime family. Says online he owns half the island. Bars, hotels, construction companies. You name it. I figure maybe there's a laundromat or two in his portfolio. She let it hang in the air for a while. When Robert didn't bite, she glared at him from over her Saturday glass of wine with dinner. Her only indulgence apart from those damned airport novels. Well, I thought it was interesting, she mumbled, sullen as a teenager. I suppose it would be if the Gary the woman mentioned was Gary Stote, or if you knew for sure this Gary Stote owned a laundromat. But honestly, I couldn't tell you if it was, and anyways, this is New York we're talking about. A city that size, there are probably 24 Garys who own laundromats. Could be none of them are the Stote fellow. Just let it go, hon. It was a couple hang-ups, nothing more. And a text, she corrected. I didn't even know you could text from a landline. Turns out you can. I looked that up, too. She beamed, pleased with herself. Robert scowled. Anything but. Oh, for God's sake, Jill, what has gotten into you? It was a wrong number, period. End of story. Now eat before your dinner gets cold. She pushed her food around her plate a while in silence, chastened by his outburst. But by meal's end, that glint of excitement in her eye had returned. Dimmer, perhaps, but not extinguished. Want to know what I think? What? He asked, not caring the slightest. I think your number used to belong to a burner phone. You know, the prepaid kind spies and mobsters use for a while and throw away. Only this Gary fellow doesn't know whoever he's calling through the phone that had that number away, and now he's calling you. A burner phone. Robert, scowling, incredulous. That's right, she replied, defensive, but suddenly unsure. Then Robert smiled and shook his head, and her good cheer reemerged. You know what, love? You sure are a piece of work. On Saturday night, the calls came again. 5 calls this time. All hang-ups. No messages, no texts. This time, Robert ensured Jillian knew nothing of them. He'd turned his phone off shortly after Jillian had gone to sleep, and only turned it back on to check when she was off attending Sunday service, deleting any record of the calls as soon as he discovered they were there. When Jillian asked over lunch if any new calls had come in, all sweetness and light as if she were simply making conversation and cared not whether any had, Robert feigned ignorance and encouraged her to check for herself. At that, Jillian leapt up from the table so quickly, he was surprised she managed not to upturn her chair. He pretended not to notice as her shoulders sagged and the color in her cheeks faded when she'd scrolled through his empty call logs. It wasn't that he begrudged Jillian her enthusiasm. Her fixation on cheesy pot boilers was no different, really, than his love of crossword puzzles or tying flies. But what seemed all in good fun over dinner had soured sometime before bed, because Jillian spent from 10 a.m. to midnight Saturday tossing and turning, worried, she told him by the light of the alarm clock, that if he really did have a number belonging to a mobster's burner phone, him calling back and leaving his full name may have put them both at risk. "What if they think we know too much?" she'd asked. And though the question seemed ludicrous to Robert, the fear in Jillian's eyes was genuine. The poor woman felt horrible for pushing him to call the number back and for giving him the cell phone in the first place, as though she'd brought this all upon him. "No danger of that," he said with a smile. But his chiding was of a gentle sort. In the end, he wrapped his arms around her and held her close until her breathing slowed, and she drifted off to sleep. Then he'd padded downstairs and turned off the phone, determined to spare his wife another restless night. Jillian didn't speak a word of the phone calls after finding none on Sunday afternoon, and that was just fine as far as Robert was concerned. But she had checked to ensure the phone was on before bed, which thwarted his plan to turn it off before they headed upstairs, ensuring he'd once more be forced to sneak back down once Jillian was asleep to shut the damn thing off, so she didn't hear the blasted missed call buzzing when she went downstairs Monday morning to make the coffee. The good news was, Jillian dropped off earlier on Sunday than she had on Saturday, some of her worry having been dissipated now that the immediacy of the event had, in her mind, passed. The bad news was, she did so nestled up against Robert, her weight atop his left arm, and it took him the better part of an hour to extricate himself without disturbing her. It was midnight by the time he got downstairs, and when he fetched his cell from where he'd left it, he was dismayed to find that there were 2 missed calls, both 212, both from Pretty Little Things. Robert stood in the darkness, pierced only by the light of the cell phone display, and thumbed clumsily through the menu screens until he deleted both missed calls. It was cold downstairs, the heat having dropped to 60 some hours before, and in boxers and an undershirt as he was, he couldn't help but shiver. The mental image he conjured of himself, 50, balding, a little doughy around the middle, knobby knees knocking in the cold as he stood freezing in his undies, seemed a world away from the strapping heroes of Jillian's beloved stories. Calls deleted, Robert moved to power the phone down, but, clumsy from cold and dark both, he couldn't find the damn button. And when he finally located it, a funny thing happened. The phone started humming in his hand. It was a call from Pretty Little Things. And after a few seconds spent willing the drum-roll patter of his heart to slow, his head darting to and fro as though expecting Jillian to leap through the open door or out from behind the fridge at any moment, Robert answered. As he descended the front porch, Robert's neck and back were warm from the heat of the flames that painted orange the windows of the house and filled the second floor with smoke. Jillian still lay in bed, but the smoke was of no concern to her. She was already dead. 2 taps, head and heart, just like the hitmen did in her precious thriller novels. Just like old times. Gary's call had been brief, just long enough to ruin Robert's life. "Hiya, Bobby. Been a while." "Sorry," Robert replied. "Nobody here by that name." "Right. How could I forget? Bobby Rossetti is dead. It's Robert now, Robert Geist. Anybody there by that name?" "How the fuck you get this number, Gary?" "What kind of amateur you take me for, Bobby? This is my business you're talking about. You think I can't track down a goddamn phone number?" "Your business, like Pretty Little Things is your business." Gary laughed. "You like the name? Thought you might. Little homage to the good old days, you could say. Though these Pretty Little Things ain't quite so exciting as the ones we used to run. Remember all them bright-eyed, fresh-faced girls just off the bus looking to make it in the big city? Thanks to you and me, they made it plenty, with anybody who had the scratch to pay for it." "That was a long time ago, Gary. Back when you and me were just a pair of dumbass kids. I'm retired, out of the game. The family business is none of mine." "Yeah," Gary said. "Funny thing about that." "Go on." "They got Frankie D'Anio, Bobby. Snatched him right off the street last week. His wife and kids, too. You hear as Vanessa had twins last year? Cute as buttons, those two, especially considering the ugly motherfucker they got for a granddad. Anyway, word is he's cutting a deal. Shit he's done, he'll be getting life either way. But word is if he cooperates, his family gets a fresh start in the program. New names, new town, new lives. So Frankie's singing, and I think you can imagine the tune. Remember those 2 cops we popped in Staten Island? Robert cut him off. For fuck's sake, Gary, I get the picture. Hey, I'm just trying to help you, man. You and me were brothers from another mother. And you gotta know if I can find you, the feds ain't far behind. Yeah, thanks a fucking ton. Listen, brother, you know what's good for you. You go to ground. God knows that's what I'm gonna do, just as soon as I can get some cash together. If you need some. But Robert thumbed the end button, tossed the cell phone in the trash. He was finished. With this phone call. With his life. He kept a handgun in his toolbox, along with a silencer and a box of rounds. When the time came, he didn't even hesitate. He moved so quietly to the bedside, Jillian didn't even stir. He didn't do it for himself. Honestly, at this point, what happened to him was unimportant. But Jillian was a good person, a pious woman, a loving wife. She didn't deserve to find out about the man he'd been before, what kind of man he really was. And as the flames behind him rose, Robert Geist disappeared into the night.
That was Pretty Little Things by Chris Holm, read by Scott Detrow. Pretty Little Things was originally published in the July 2013 issue of Ellery Queen's Mystery Magazine. Be sure to keep an eye out for Chris's upcoming thriller, The Killing Kind. I can't wait to read it. You can also learn more about Chris at Chris F. Holm, that's Holm, chrisfholm.blogspot.com. He's also very active on Twitter and Facebook, so search him out there. In the realm of news about my own work, I recently collaborated with the incredibly talented Dylan Samuelson on a comic book called Fortune. I wrote the script, Dylan supplied the art, and I could not be more pleased with the finished product. You can download a PDF copy of Fortune for free from Noise Trade. You can buy a physical copy from Indie Planet. Links to both of those are easily found at my website, ericarneson.com. Also, depending when you listen to this podcast, I hope to see you at one of the first 3 public readings of my fiction, Noir at the Bar in Philadelphia on October 29th, the NoirCon Conference, also in Philadelphia, on October 31st, or BoucherCon on November 12th, out in Long Beach, California. Just check out my website for details about all 3. As always, thank you for listening to Title 18 Word Crimes. If you like the podcast, don't forget to subscribe on iTunes or Stitcher, and if you really like the show, please leave a review at iTunes or Stitcher. We would really appreciate it. Subscribe now, and you won't miss upcoming stories by great authors like Johnny Shaw and David Cranmer. In addition to those great stories, we're planning a few special episodes of the podcast featuring authors reading their own work, which I'm going to record at Noir at the Bar and NoirCon. If you want to get in touch with Scott or me, it's really easy. Scott's on Twitter at Scott, Detrow, and you can find me at ericarneson.com. That's ERIKARNESON.com. I'm also at Eric Arneson on Twitter and easy to find on Facebook. Every episode of the Word Crimes podcast is archived at ericarneson.com. Check out the page for this episode to find links to Chris Holm's website and a whole lot more. The music on this episode is by The Throws. You can find them at The Throws, THROES, thethrows.com. Thanks again for listening to Title 18 Word Crimes. We'll be back soon.